Thanks, Ed. Thanks to at home for staying with us for the next hour. Today, of course, is the federal holiday honoring the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. There is news ahead this hour about why today's holiday was the occasion for a noisy protest outside the door of one red state governor today. Also, in one of the states where there is a huge fight over union rights right now, some Republicans are now taking a side that you would not expect them to take in that fight. That's the subject of the interview here tonight. Also, let's see, there's Ron Paul's head randomly, right there. We'll have news on all of those things still to come this hour. See, I have to look at myself in the monitor and it's reversed. It's like a mirror image, so it's hard. There he is, Ron Paul. Okay. All right. But I have to tell you first, there has been some totally unexpected and strange news in the 2012 race today. It's about the meeting of religious right leaders that took place over the weekend in Texas. You may recall us talking about this on Friday night's show because the meeting got underway Friday night at this ranch outside of Houston. The idea was that religious conservatives who are unhappy with the apparent coronation of Mitt Romney as the Republican Party's nominee, those religious right leaders would put aside their differences and agree to coalesce around one non-Mitt Romney Republican candidate. So that somebody would have a chance of beating Mr. Romney for the Republican nomination. Now, when news at the meeting was first leaked, the prospect was even raised that this group of evangelical leaders might even pressure one or more of the candidates they did not support to get out of the race. So the plan was basically to winnow the field, to show consensus, to throw their collective weight behind somebody, and thus to make it possible for the Republican Party to nominate somebody not named Mitt. That was the idea behind this big weekend meeting. It has apparently gone horribly wrong. The first thing that we heard was a big announcement. This group of religious right leaders, they said, had decided to endorse Rick Santorum. Okay, so far so good. It's kind of how we expected it to go. But then, rumblings of discontent. Now, I have to pause here to let you know that some of this reporting comes from the Washington Post. It comes from Karen Tumulty, who is a venerable campaign trail reporter with very, very good sources on the right. I would trust her till the end of the earth. But some of the rest of this reporting comes from the Washington Times. Now, the Washington Times is a conservative paper for conservatives only, and the Washington Times can get a little batty at times. It is not a particularly credible news source, except when their stories are about internal feuds on the right. Then the Washington Times is often dynamite. Like when Michael Steele was head of the Republican Party and there was that insurgency inside the party to try to tear him down and get rid of him, most of the blind quotes and eventually the not so blind quotes that came from people who were willing to talk about that fight within the Republican Party, most of those showed up in the pages of the Washington Times. That was the place where that entire saga played out. So do you read the Washington Times for an authoritative account of some partisan, party line dispute in Congress or some internal deliberation in the Obama administration? No, you do not. Do you read, though? Do you read the Washington Times for religious right backstabby mayhem over Republican presidential endorsements? Yes, that is exactly the sort of thing for which you read the Washington Times. Listen to this from today's Washington Times. A civil war is breaking out among evangelical leaders over allegations of a rigged election and ballot stuffing at a Saturday gathering of religious and social conservatives. In back-and-forth emails, Protestant fundamentalist leaders who attended, most of them backing former House Speaker Newt Gingrich to be the anti-Romney candidate, are accusing Catholic participants of conniving to rig the vote. They say they were conned into leaving after the second ballot on Saturday. They said Pro-Santorum participants then held a third ballot, which Mr. Santorum won. My view is that the vote was manipulated, said a prominent social conservative who asked not to be named. Now, a prominent evangelical political organizer is saying to others confidentially that he has evidence that in at least one instance a participant was seen writing Mr. Santorum's name on 4 separate ballots and putting them in the ballot box. Evangelicals who left after the second ballot are now calling on Bob Fisher, a leader of the proceedings, to hold a recount. A recount of your religious gathering? So they want to recount. They were conned into leaving before the final vote was taken. There was ballot box stuffing. There is somehow a Protestant Catholic schism, even though both Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich are Catholics. At the very least, the Protestants are now accusing the Catholics of conniving to rig the vote. That's me quoting the Washington Times, conniving to rig the vote. Remember, the whole idea of holding this meeting in the first place was to unify religious conservatives, to give one candidate the consensus stamp of approval of all of these leaders, to smooth over any differences among these conservatives, to show they can all come together behind one non-Mitt Romney candidate. Over at the Washington Post, Karen Tumulty has a few of the disgruntled Gingrich supporters on the record explaining, essentially, consensus my foot. No way did they support Rick Santorum, even if they were at that meeting. And anybody saying elsewise is a liar. One Newt Gingrich supporter, Jim Garlow, telling the Washington Post, quote, "There was never a consensus. All of the people I know who came supporting Newt left supporting Newt." Former Republican Congressman J.C. Watts saying, quote, "It wasn't a consensus and it wasn't an endorsement." Wow. Despite all of that, the head of the Family Research Council, Tony Perkins, came out publicly almost immediately after the meeting, and he did announce that Rick Santorum had secured a, quote, "clear majority of support." And of course, then he had to gush. He said, quote, I will have to admit that what I did not think was possible appears to be possible. There is clearly a unified group here." Tony Perkins may feel unified, but with Newt Gingrich supporters saying to the press now that this was rigged by the Catholics, that the ballot boxes were stuffed and the vote was manipulated, and they're being called Rick Santorum supporters when they most assuredly are not Rick Santorum supporters, and they want to recount, this supposed unity endorsement projects neither unity nor all that much of an endorsement. But if this apparent gift left on the Santorum campaign's doorstep appears to be a flaming one that you have to stamp on to put out, it's not like the rival Gingrich campaign is doing all that great right now either.
We are awaiting the arrival of former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, who we are given to understand is still about 10 minutes away. I tell you what, while we locate the speaker, who I'm sure is somewhere nearby, back at the station, we will go ahead and take advantage of this brief delay in the proceedings to take a brief commercial timeout. That's okay. We can wait. We have no place else to go. We're already here. By the way, welcome to Senator Rick Santorum, who just arrived a few minutes ago. Senator, good to see you, sir.
That was Friday afternoon in Duncan, South Carolina. Mr. Gingrich introduced from the podium, but he's nowhere to be found. Mr. Gingrich was running late. Apparently nobody bothered to tell the MC or the crowd before he got introduced. And then he gets the world's most awkward absentee standing ovation that he's not there to receive. But then it turns out even worse. His rival, Rick Santorum, was there at the same event at the time. So he got to capitalize on all of the Newt-mentum where nobody knew where Newt Gingrich was. Just a logistical disaster. The Associated Press has now run a bit of a survey piece on all of the logistical stuff that the Gingrich campaign keeps screwing up. Things like leaving J.C. Watts to stall for Mr. Gingrich in front of a crowd twice in one day, and also to serve as the lookout for the Gingrich campaign bus because nobody knew when Mr. Gingrich was going to arrive. There was also a church forum over the weekend where the microphones didn't work. Phone conferences also going bad. Quoting from the Associated Press, a call scheduled for Saturday morning never took place. The dial-in number was invalid. The campaign set up a new number for a Saturday night call with Florida voters. This time the number worked, but there was nothing but silence on the other end of the line when the moderator introduced the first two questioners. The issue was resolved, but not before Mr. Gingrich himself raised an important question. I wonder if we're having a technical problem. Beyond all of his technical problems, including not being on the ballot in his home state of Virginia, the Gingrich campaign also seems to have successfully been successfully bullied out of their strongest line of attack against Mitt Romney, which of course was Mr. Romney's career at Bain Capital. Having essentially withdrawn that line of attack now, which looks like a real display of weakness by Mr. Gingrich, and also him surrendering a strategic advantage that he had against Mr. Romney, withdrawing the Bain attack now means that Mr. Gingrich is now trying to find another line of attack against Mr. Romney to replace the Bain line. Today, he tried one out. Today, he told voters in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, quote, "Why would you want to nominate the guy who lost to the guy who lost to Obama?" True. Think about it. But also think about this. The guy who lost to the guy who lost to Obama is the guy to whom Newt Gingrich is currently losing, which would make Newt Gingrich the guy losing to the guy who lost to the guy who lost to Obama. So I don't know that this one has legs. And so maybe South Carolina is not that competitive. Maybe the whole nominating contest is mostly over. All the latest polls out of South Carolina have Mitt Romney on top. Insider Advantage has him up by 11. PPP has him up by 5. Rasmussen has him up by 7. But into a race that is starting to feel a little bit like a foregone conclusion. The political calendar has given us a reminder that chaos is always around the corner, that anything can happen. The day of the South Carolina Republican primary, this upcoming Saturday, also happens to be the birthday of Citizens United. 2 years ago, this Saturday is when the Supreme Court announced that infinite money, essentially anonymously spent, can take over American elections. It's legal. So no matter how poorly everybody is running against Mitt Romney for the Republican nomination right now, if at some point some billionaire wants to put millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars behind some non-Mitt Romney candidate, there's nothing to stop him. One eccentric billionaire who can spend infinitely doesn't need to come to consensus with anybody, doesn't need to stuff any ballot box, doesn't need to persuade anyone. Just open checkbook, swivel wrist, and the game is back on.
Super PACs are outspending the candidates 2-to-1 in South Carolina right now. That just means, according to Citizens United, there's just more speech than there was before. And I don't know about you, but I believe in the freedom of speech. Money equals speech. Therefore, the more money you have, the more you can speak.
Dan Rather will be joining us next.